working on an end grain cutting board. If you need to see how I got to this point, go ahead and click that link and you'll see all the steps leading up to here. But now I'm dealing with one of the toughest parts of end grain cutting boards is getting it flat. When I glued it up, I used some cawls across it to hold it flat so it wouldn't move with the clamping pressure. But even after having done that, you can see there's some undulations here and it's not perfectly flat. So to flatten this with, say, a belt sander or an orbital sander, it would be a nightmare and it wouldn't really come out that flat. You'd probably end up having to put feet underneath it to keep it from tipping. I want a flat cutting board that we can use both sides of. That's my goal. So I'm going to show you a couple ways to do that, but in both cases, we need to start off by making this little sled. So I've made this piece to saddle the cutting board. It slips right in there. Okay, and I'm using MDF as my material. It happens that mine has veneer on it, but you can just go to a home improvement store and pick up the raw MDF. I'm using that because it's pretty darn flat. It doesn't twist and warp like plywood can. It's going to give me a good reference for flat. So I've made a piece that covers the width of the cutting board. I have these side pieces here, and you'll notice they go up a little bit higher than the cutting board. That's important. You'll also notice that my overall sled is longer than the cutting board. That's important too, and you'll see why. So I also want it all to fit nice and tight. That way, as I cut, I won't have any chip out or blowout. And so I fit it tight on the sides. I screwed it in from underneath. I set the back piece in, and now I want to put this piece in, pull it nice and tight. Tight so there's no void there, okay? And I've pre-drilled, and you can see right here that little split when you're working with MDF. It's really important to pre-drill. It wants to split like crazy. So let me get this side screw in, and this one as well. Now, if you look at the underside, you'll see I have screws all underneath holding this in, and I'll add these on in a second. You don't need to see that, but I do want you to see these side screws. These are really important because as we pass this through one of the machines that we can flatten it with, it's going to want to take that wood and roll it over. And if you only have screws coming up from underneath, they're going to very easily just push over. But if we have one in from the side, it'll stop that. And just be aware that you're going to want to set that down far from the cutter so it doesn't get hit. So now that we have our sled made, let me show you the next step. All right, so this is the first method I want to show you. I'm going to use a router for this. You've probably seen a few different versions of this. I think this is the simplest way. Again, I have my sled, and now I'm essentially making a very large faceplate for my router. You'll notice the faceplate mounts onto the router by using these three bolt holes. And I can use that as a template to make a new faceplate. Essentially, this part of the fixture is a very large faceplate. I'm using plexiglass so I can see what's going on. You can do this with plywood if you like, but I really like that I can see. The plexi might not have a lot of strength, and that's why I've added these rails here. I haven't attached this one so you can see what's going on here. But they just get screwed on, and the straightness of this rail keeps the faceplate nice and straight. So between sitting in the flat bed and using the strong backs here on our faceplate, it'll keep everything nice and flat. And so to be able to mount the router to this, I'll find the center, and you can see I drilled a hole here. That's for the bit to go through. And then I need to perfectly replicate the location of these bolt holes. Well, the easiest way to do that is to take the actual faceplate from the router, place it centered over that hole that you drilled, and then this is a self-centering hinge bit. This is for if you're putting hinges on a door, you'll notice that the screw holes for the hinges are countersunk. This sits in a countersink, and the drill comes through perfectly centered. And so we'll use it here because these holes are countersunk, and we'll just drill through with the drill, and then continue through with the larger bit, and then countersink it, and that way it'll mount on perfectly. It works great. It's very simple. I do it a lot to make a lot of my own faceplates. So let me show you one other trick to this. So the reason why we have that saddle so tight is that I don't want, as the router comes around and makes it cut, I don't want any fraying on the edges of my end grain cutting board. So that's why it's saddled in there, and then I want the cut to go all the way and actually cut into the side. It's a sacrificial side. That way I complete the cut all the way through, and I don't have any little things on the end to sand off. And so to do that, I've added these stop blocks. So you'll see this represents the center of the router base. That's where the bit is going to be. You can see that goes pretty much centered over the edge of that, but not piercing through. And I do that by stopping against this block, and that's just screwed on. I don't even have to countersink for that one. And then I have the same thing happening over here, okay, and it's stopping there. Now I'm using plexiglass so I can see what I'm doing, so I'm not bothering to put a stop on the ends. I have a pretty good view of what I'm cutting, but if you're using plywood, you might want to add a little stop here. You can see right here, that would pierce through and cut into that a little bit. I might need to extend my jig to put a little block of wood to stop it there. So with that said, let me finish mounting on that last piece that I held off so you can see. We'll get the router mounted, grab the dust collection, and let's give it a whirl. All right, so I got my router set up, my dust collection hooked up. You're going to want dust collection, even if it's just a shop vac for this. It really makes a mess. And you can see, just trying it dry, it's a nice smooth, I say smooth and I bump something. It's this nice smooth movement. Maybe I have one screw that didn't quite countersink. But it's going to go pretty quickly. I set my depth, I'm taking like 3/30 seconds, like almost an eighth off. I don't want to take off much more than that at a time. If you're wondering how to set the depth on your plunge router, check out this video, and you got to use a plunge router for this, for safety. You can't just take a standard base and dive down. It's all kinds of problems. But let's give it a whirl and see what it looks like. So I'm catching a little bit as I go around and butt up with this. That means I should just round over those edges with sandpaper. And it actually looks like I can go a little bit deeper before we really see good results. Let me adjust the depth and give it another cut. As you can see, even with good dust collection, this makes a bit of a mess. If I didn't have any dust collection, I would be covered right now. But let's check out the results we're getting. So those are nice, flat results. I'm going to grab a straight edge. Here, this block will do. You can see there's no gaps there. That's nice and flat, no matter where I position it. And so that's the flatness of the sled that I made, referencing, again, against the flat rails on the router faceplate to create two nice parallel planes. This is a nice way to do it if you don't have a planer, but now that we've gone through that, let me show you another way that you can use this sled through your planer. All right, so if you don't have a plunge router or you don't want to take the extra time to make the faceplate for the plunge router, you can run this through the planer. And it's designed to do that. By bracing the wood on all four sides, we ensure that there's no chip out. Now, the one difference between the plunge router and the planer is that on the plunge router, we're cutting into the sides of these guys, so you can keep reusing and reusing all the side pieces. But when we feed it through the planer, these side pieces are there in part for the rollers that grab and feed the wood through the planer to grab onto, because the cutting board is usually a little too short for that. So these pieces are sacrificial, so you'll find that you'll need to replace them periodically, or the next time you go and reuse the fixture, you're going to have to make your cutting board a little bit less thick. I feel it's worth it, it gives you good results, and it's really safe. So with that said, let's turn on the dust collection and run this through. You can see this is tearing out a bit here, but it's tearing out on the sacrificial piece, now my final work piece. All right, so I ran this through the planer. You're only going to take a very, very small amount off at a time. You can see I have very nice, smooth results. Everything's very flat. There's no daylight in between the bottom of the blade of my combination square and the surface of the cutting board. You'll see that there is some damage here, and that would have been all along this back edge. Now, maybe in hindsight, maybe I could have used something a little sturdier than the MDF for this part, but again, I do like using MDF for the bottom because it's nice and flat, so I'll let you choose what materials you use. But let's take a quick second and compare it to the routed side. Now on the router, the side that I cut with the router, it's not as smooth. There is some pitting left, and maybe that could be the bit I used. The bit I used was a very nice sharp bit, but that might be something to look at. But I think that this is going to happen no matter what. And even though this is just as flat, there's no daylight between the blade of my combination square and the top of the cutting board. It's going to take me quite a bit of sanding to get rid of this. So if sanding's your enemy, then you're going to want to run this through the planer. Again, very small passes. Now, this same fixture could be used to really eliminate the sanding and have incredibly minimized it by either running through the planer first and then running it through a wide belt sander. This essentially works very similarly to the planer. There's two rollers that feed it through and then a large abrasive head, and you can work your way through from coarse to fine grits and really eliminate a lot of the sanding. The difference is, with all this stuff, the difference is money. If you have the money to invest in that, and you're going to be doing a lot of it, that's going to save you lots of time. Just making one or two, you know, it really depends on how much elbow grease you want to put into it. But by making the sled, you can see that we have a nice flat cutting board that we can use both sides of, which to me is critical. So once you have it sanded, you're going to need to put a coat of finish on it. So go ahead and follow through to the next video where I show you the fastest way to get a good sheen on your cutting board and a good food safe finish. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. I'll see you down in the comments.